You're listening to the Fantasy Wildcard Podcast.
Good evening. Welcome to the Fantasy Wildcard Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Kev. You can follow me on X at The Dynasty Mind. You can obviously see that I'm the only best member of the Fantasy Wildcard on tonight's show. Mags and Ali, they were terrible on last week's Row show, so much that people have asked that they be removed from all episodes moving forward. So it was nice podcasting with you both. And it's just me from now on. But enough about that. That's obviously a lie. We've got a fantastic show tonight. Obviously, I'm the best one from the Fantasy Wildcard. We've got the best one from the Fantasy Sanctuary, maybe. We'll have to have a little debate about that, I think. We've got an amazing guest, a co-creator of the Fantasy Sanctuary, a writer and podcast editor at Fantasy Pros, and he's the best thing to come out of Geordie Shore. We've got Tom Strachan, who you can follow on X at NFL. Ball Legend Tom, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I feel like at a point I might have to, point out I was actually born in Oxford, grew up in Lancaster, and I've only lived in the Northeast for maybe half my life.
Yeah, you can tell with the accent that there's some sort of like either poshness or it just knocks the edge off the YI man chat, doesn't it?
Give me another 10 years up here.
But obviously I made the Geordie Shore reference because of work you may or may not have done on that show in the early stages, maybe for another conversation. But yeah, we have got a great show tonight. We're going to be talking all things Dynasty Best Ball. My friend Tommy's an absolute stud in this format. He's won many a league, and he's someone that I consider an expert in best ball, not only in the UK but also throughout the world. So I think blending both those ideas is the perfect guest for tonight's show. And I guess Dynasty Best Ball, for me, Tom, it's something that I'm really gravitating towards as a Dynasty player. It's something that's lower maintenance in terms of in-season for like lineup setting and things like that. So before we get into sort of players that we're going to target that you want to highlight as targets and fades, could you just let us know a little bit about what you would consider the key differences between Dynasty Best Ball and your traditional Dynasty League with lineups?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it briefly, Kev. It's all about finding that balance of lower maintenance levels. Like, if you're only going to play in one Dynasty League, then Dynasty Best Ball probably isn't the way to go. You probably want to be in a more traditional format where there are going to be waivers, where you are churning your roster a little more constantly. But for those of us sickos who are in double-digit Dynasty Leagues or much more, then rather than having to worry, because that first Sunday of the season, when it hits, that's the Sunday where all the crows come home to roost for how many startups you did this season. And I have my league set up in Sleeper where it's like managed leagues at the top, redraft, then Dynasty, and then Dynasty Best Ball. And when I'm setting lineups for all those different ones, when I get that Dynasty Best Ball, it is just an absolute wave of relief that washes over you, knowing I don't need to set the lineup here. It's going to be like Best Ball in terms of setting the best possible lineup for me each week. And I think it just opens up so many other parts of the game. You can concentrate on trades because there are limited waiver runs if you play in the leagues like we do, where we do waivers once every 4 weeks. I find that it tends to force trades because teams can't sit back and wait 4 weeks all the time to deal with an injury or deal with a suspension or something. So I think that is a real positive because you see so many more trades going through at certain times of the year. But then in the off season, it does allow you a little bit in between the rookie draft and the season to be able to just relax a little bit because you don't feel like you need to be checking the waiver wire constantly. You can sit back, you can just take it easy knowing that one of your other league mates or Tarek isn't putting in 15 waiver claims every single day. So, yeah, like I'm a big fan of Dynasty Best Ball. I think finding that balance of league mates who are okay with the format and aren't looking for something more active, and finding that balance of like having enough waiver runs so that people don't switch off, keeping the trade window open all year round. That's the sort of stuff I find is very much good for it. And you kind of have to find that balance as well of how deep the benches are, because if your benches are too deep, then people feel like they can overcome the injuries. But if you're sort of playing in that 25-man roster to 30-man roster total size, then you really don't want to be carrying too many injuries, particularly if you're contending. If you're tanking, then trade for as many injured players as possible. You want to field as few starters as possible every week. But if you're contending, you need those players who have the potential to give you a ceiling week every single week.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up really well. Like, it's something that I really enjoy playing. The fact that I'm in, I'll get my shots in early because we know what people are going to say. I've started so many. I'm in 36 leagues now.
86.
It's a nice number because it divides into 12. But means I'm doing 48 next off season. But yeah, I think it's a format which is low maintenance, and like you say, you get a process. You'll find something that works for you each sort of 4 weeks when it comes to trades and your waivers and that. So I think it's you hit the nail on the head with finding the right league mates as well, because you don't want people complaining. You don't want like people not really enjoying it, because it is something different. I think you'll find people that prefer this to your standard dynasty leagues, and
it's definitely not for everyone. Like, I've known people who've come into the league, done a year or two, and then moved on, and I can understand that. Like, it is different to your traditional dynasty league. So trying it out and sampling it, doing a year or two, I think you really get a good flavor for it. And then if you enjoy it like we do, then it's an easy way to go, okay, well, this offseason I'm only going to do one startup, but I might do 2 dynasty best ball startups so that I still get my startup itch scratched.
Exactly. And I'll be honest, like the leagues that I'm in, the best teams are the ones that tend to be best in dynasty, in the sense that they're the most engaged, the most active. If they've got injuries at the bottom of the roster, they're looking to get them out for new waivers or for trading. So there's still that core value within people that being active is going to get you towards the end goal. It's just a different way to sort of think about it. But thinking about best ways to win in dynasty, what about sort of the best players and worst players you would consider in this format?
So I think this is very much a format that favors the elite wide receivers, and even wide receiver twos on high scoring offenses. Like, I don't feel like buying a Christian McCaffrey is going to put me over the edge in this format, because running back spike weeks are so unpredictable. You know, 1 week they can be coming. Yes, you're never going to compete with Christian McCaffrey on a total like-for-like basis. But you get guys like Devin Singletary popping up for big weeks. You know, you get guys like Chuba Hubbard popping up for big weeks. And if I can absolutely stack my starting roster with as many good wide receivers as possible, as well as good quarterbacks, then I'm kind of a lot more comfortable thinking that running back will take care of itself. Yes, you need guys who have a path to decent volume. You don't need just guys who are third down backs only. But if you can play the archetype game a little bit like that, it tends to pay off. And your wide receivers just hold value so much better. Like, you know, I don't need to worry about the roster churn year to year of the wide receivers. Instead, I can just be looking, okay, can I find a guy like Damian Harris for a second or a third round pick, or Ramondre Stevenson like a couple of years ago? These kind of guys that it's like, right, I've got a couple extra of these picks in the second or third round. I'll throw them at one of these running backs who might have the potential to turn into a top 20 running back. And that should be enough to help me, as long as my elite quarterback and elite wide receivers do the job that I want from them. I think it's also a really beneficial format to wide receiver twos on offenses, because they tend to be a little devalued at times. I mean, it depends which one you're talking about, but some people can be like, oh, well, you know, in managed leagues, they worry themselves about when they're going to be able to start a wide receiver 2. Whereas in this, it's like, okay, fine, I will take him because I know he's going to be on a team which is going to score in the top 10% of touchdowns across the league this year. So yeah, there's definitely different archetypes of players that I favor more in this structure.
Yeah, I think exactly that. Volatility is really, really something to embrace in the wide receiver slot. Like you was mentioning, wide receiver 2s. I think players that sprung to mind thinking back a couple of years when we first got into this were like Tyler Lockett's, and obviously pouring one out for a Will Fuller type, which it was always a lovely roller coaster to be on, where you don't have to decide when he's going to be in your lineup. It's just get him on your roster, and some weeks is going to be the goods, and on the down weeks you're going to have someone step in automatically and take that spot. So I think great shouts, and we'll sort of see how it plays out with the show tonight with regards to some of the targets and the fades and matching to that theory then. And with that in mind, let's get straight into it. The targets at the positions. We're going to go quarterback first of all. Who are you looking to target in Dynasty Best Ball at QB?
So it's Trevor Lawrence, unanimous 101 when he came out. He hasn't been great. He's only scored 23 points or more in 16% of his games, only finished in the top 12 in 13 of his last 34 games. But I think there's still plenty of reason for hope. Like, you look back over the last few years, and it's just been difficult for Lawrence in Jacksonville. Like, things haven't gone easily for him at times, but it's not always been about him. It's been the head coach, or it's been a new offense, bits like that. Calvin Ridley last year was kind of viewed as the guy that could help Lawrence turn the corner. And Ridley ranked 68th in catch rate among wide receivers with 50 targets or more. Like, that's not good for any avoidance of doubt. He ranked 4th in red zone targets among all pass catchers, but he had the lowest catch rate in the top 14 with 40%. And some of those were fingertips away or toes just out of bounds kind of thing. So
see the video.
Yeah, that's it. Ian Hartitz put out like a 6-minute video or whatever of almost touchdowns that could have been completed. Then you talk about Travis Etienne completely dropped off last year, so he wasn't getting production out of running back in the same way, and then you're not getting defenses respect the run game. Part of that was because the offensive line was so piss poor last year, and the Jags know that. Like, they really struggled against interior pressure. They went out and got Mitch Morse from the Bills to play center. He only allowed 1 sack last year. Cam Robinson, their left tackle, missed 8 games last year. Their right tackle was a rookie, first-round pick, but it was his first year playing right tackle after moving there from left tackle. So there's all these kind of little bits where I go, you know what, if Lawrence gets a little bit more fortune, then there's definitely a chance for him. Like, he ranked 17th in completion rate when kept clean last year, which isn't particularly good, but he ranked 28th when pressured. So it really cratered because he couldn't trust the offensive line in front of him. I think the Jags could definitely do better in terms of the play designs they give to their wide receivers, mix things up more. But also, Christian Kirk's injury felt like a big blow to him because over T-Law's career, he's averaged 4.8 more points per game with Kirk on the field than not. So, yeah, I'm just optimistic that this guy who we all viewed as generational still has a chance to not necessarily get into the elite quarterbacks, but I think he can be a top 8 quarterback again.
Yeah, I think first of all, Christian Kirk is someone that I absolutely love. So that's a great shout out to him. Got him paid, wasn't it? Yeah, I mean, Trevor Lawrence, he's someone that, I'll be honest, I think he's been disappointing in his career. There has been some outside factors which have contributed, but I think fantasy-wise, he has left a bit of taste in the mouth for many owners. What I will say is, when I see Trevor Lawrence at QB 13, I'm actually all right with that. You know, I think in this format, you're looking at upside, you're looking at ceiling at QB for me. The archetypes of your sort of balanced or dual threat QBs, they're actually safer than pocket passers, volatility wise, because even in the bad weeks passing, they're getting rushing points. And then there's that elevated ceiling through what they can do. And yeah, there's been factors like he's top 6 or 7 in pass attempts every year. But And the pace of play is great, which I think it's going to stay the same with Doug Peterson. He's not going to change from what's worked for him over the years. So you can sort of bank on it's going to be high pass volume. It's going to be going at a fast pace. I don't think they're an amazing team overall, which means I can't see them leading tons of games all season. So I still think the volume's going to be there. There's a new set of weapons: Gabe Davis, Brian Thomas, two deep threats who are explosive. And I think that plays into this format as well, where, you know what, there could be some weeks where Lawrence is QB 16, 17, 18, sure. But I do think these guys, they have the potential to take him up into that top 5 in any given week. So I'm pretty cool with Lawrence at this price. And I think just looking around him, there's not much in that tier or the tier below which screams to me Konami QB. I think Jaden Daniels I've got above. But then you're looking at guys like Purdy, Goff, Dak, and it's kind of like upside for them guys to hit what Trevor Lawrence could hit. They have to have these stupid seasons like Purdy did last year.
Yeah, and for me, it's more as a QB2, I'd be targeting Lawrence. I wouldn't want Lawrence to be my QB1 necessarily, but if you're trying to build out a real contender and you can get someone like Trevor Lawrence ranked QB13, I think that's probably a rate in which, if you look around the industry, there's probably quite a big disparity on where people have him ranked. But yeah, if I could get him at QB13 prices to be my QB2, I'd be quite happy.
Yeah, he's got great hair as well. So we're going to move on to the next guy. I don't know if he's got great hair, he might have. But a guy, when I saw this name, I was kind of taken back a little bit. So who's your running back you tagging?
Well, you know, I didn't want to come on here and just play all the hits, so I thought I'd try and dig a bit deeper and gone with Kendre Miller. Everything out of New Orleans this offseason has just been positive for Miller when it comes to the beat reporters. When it comes to Dennis Allen, he hasn't sang praises at all, but he hates everyone. I'm a big fan of the Coach Speak Index on Twitter, and the amount of clips they've shown, and they always caveat everything by saying Dennis Allen never talks positively about anyone. I think the only player he talks positively about is like Taysom Hill. So it's like, fine. But yeah, Miller got injured last year in OTAs, which we just know that that's always massively harmful for rookies. Like, if you're not out there in OTAs, if you're not out there in training camp, you don't get that first healthy offseason. It seems so difficult for coaches to trust the rookies unless they really show something incredibly special. So by the time that he was kind of getting healthy, you've got Alvin Kamara back, who, when he did get there, he was an absolute dog in the receiving game in just pure volume. He was an absolute PPR cheat code. But he had career lows in yards after contact per attempt, career low in yards per reception at 6.2. His breakaway yardage has been below 15% for 3 straight years. And even though he had the highest running back target share last year at 19%, when you start looking at the running numbers, he had less than 4 yards per carry, ranked 33rd in missed tackles forced per game, which is something we'd always associated with Alvin Kamara being able to make defenders miss. So, yes, Miller isn't a foolproof prospect. He had 1,400 yards, 17 touchdowns, I think, when he was at TCU in the last year. And he's done nothing so far. But it seems like writing is on the wall that Alvin Kamara is out of New Orleans after this year. That's what most beat reporters expect. Alvin Kamara even seems to expect it, which is why he held out for like the last afternoon of OTAs or whatever, like the softest holdout ever. So, unless Alvin Kamara gets some extra money pushed into another year or a year pegged onto his contract, I just think Kendre Miller, even if he doesn't turn into the starter a year from now, if Alvin Kamara gets cut after this season, there's going to be a sell window on Kendre Miller. And we're talking, what, RB29 currently? And I think you'd get a better price from that in a few months' time.
Yeah, I must admit, like, I'm one of Alvin Kamara's biggest fanboys, so this is what took me back with Kendre Miller. But being a logical, smart guy that I am, Dynasty Mind, took a step back and sort of dug a little bit deep into Kendre Miller, and I think a couple of things stood out. First of all, he's super young, so like he was 20 when he was drafted last year. Rookie running backs, we know year 2 is when they really sort of smash and take that step. And then bits that I really liked Kamara missed the game. I think week 18 he was out, and Kendrick Miller got the bulk of the load and performed really well. And also early in the season he had a game with, I think, 4 receptions, 50 yards, which showed a bit of upside as a pass catcher, because he's got pretty decent size to be like I'm not going to say a bell cow running back, but he's got the ability to do both the rushing and the passing side of things. I think running back 29, he's someone that in your traditional leagues, your lineup leagues, he's your running back 3, and you're going to need to use him as your starter some weeks, which I think without a Kamara injury is difficult. However, in this format, you don't have to do that. You're going to get guys, like you mentioned, that you pick up late that spike at certain points. It means you can sort of carry Kendrick Miller as a skeleton key as such, where Kamara goes down injured. He's got potentially running back 1 on a given week in my eyes with that sort of skill set. And then, like you say, longer term, there's going to be windows where if Kamara goes, he's automatically going to jump up to top 20. You've seen guys like Ty Spears, Jalen Warren, that just they have a bit of form, they get the starting job, the catapult. So
it's just that window, isn't it? It's just that window between the end of the season and free agency and the draft. Like, those windows to sell are really good opportunities. And it goes back to what I was saying before, that I think you can go out and send a third, 2/3 and get Kendrick Miller right now. And I think you'd easily get a second for him in the off season.
Just easy wins, isn't it? To add to the Iron Bank as such. So yeah, it's a great pick with Kendrick Miller. We're coming to your next pick, Tom, which for anybody that listens to the Road Show, this is a familiar name. It's Drake London. I'm not going to hide the suspense. We know who it is. But I do think it's a really interesting one, because it's going to give a balanced view to the audience after getting slammed last week. So yeah, Drake London, wide receiver 13. Tell us why he's someone you're going after in Dynasty Best Ball, Tom.
So Drake London for me is just somebody I'm being aggressive on in all formats. And there's definitely an element of, okay, we haven't seen it from him, but we haven't really seen kind of, we do get these situations. Like Garrett Wilson has dealt with terrible quarterback play for the last 2 years, and nobody's really worried about his potential outcome to be a top-end wide receiver still. Since Drake London was drafted, he's been in awful situations. Like, over the last 2 years, the quarterbacks in Atlanta have averaged 183 yards per game. Kirk Cousins averaged 275 in that spell. And yes, part of this comes out of Justin Jefferson. It comes out of TJ Hawkinson. It comes out of the play calling. But part of it is just that Kirk Cousins is a really accurate quarterback. He's been the 4th most accurate quarterback over the last 10 years. Last year, Desmond Ridder ranked 66, at 68 quarterbacks.
Love that.
Kirk Cousins averaged 10 more catchable passes per game last year than Desmond Ridder's 16. And it all comes down to play volume. Like, there's been so few passes in Atlanta. They played at a decent pace, but because they ran the ball so much, it reduces the clock so quickly, because the clock's always winding. So even if you're passing at okay numbers, which they weren't, there's just less time on the clock to make it work. So there's little bits where you can say, okay, Drake London should be doing slightly better in this, like his touchdowns. I think that's an area where he definitely could improve. Like, he scored 6 touchdowns on 13 expected touchdowns over the last 2 years. So even if you point to that, you go, okay, but there should be some positive regression coming there. In terms of other stuff, like over the last 2 years, Kyle Pitts and Drake London have ranked bottom 8 at their position in catchable target rate. Kirk Cousins is an absolute diamond when it comes to hitting the middle of the field. That's where Drake London thrives. If you go look at reception perception data, all those in-breaking routes across the middle of the field where, for a 6'4" guy, he can really duck and move into those areas nicely. He's averaged 4.27 receptions per game through 33 career games. But I just think that's going to double, because the Falcons, who were bottom 4 in pass attempts last year, all the noise coming out of them this offseason has been they want to play fast. They want to play fast. And I think it makes sense. That's why you bring in a quarterback like Kirk Cousins. They also brought in Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore, which, yes, those are not amazing moves. I do think Darnell Mooney has the potential to bounce back closer to his sophomore season. But if Kyle Pitts is actually healthy and not dragging his knee around on the field, then it's just going to command more attention away from Drake London. So, yes, he's probably still going to get double teamed, but you can't triple team him at times or give all your best defenders to one side of the field. So there's definitely an element of this which is embracing risk. But, a couple of years ago, I was on this show talking about how if people didn't want to take Trey Lance, then they were playing scared. So, it's kind of, I'm always willing to take big swings when it comes to Dynasty. And I do a lot of shows with Colin Kelly of Rotoviz. And one thing he always talks about, and Rotoviz in general always talk about, is not just thinking about the ADP for this year, but saying who has the chance within this ADP to move up and down. And I think we've got a lot of really good veteran wide receivers still near the top of Dynasty rankings who could slip slightly. And I just kind of view Drake London as somebody who can climb 4 or 5 spots here.
Yeah, I think you make some really interesting points. Like, a lot of that I agree with. The fact that the Falcons, they played slow, the pass attempts was lower. Cousins, he's got to be an upgrade over Ridder, even if he is on one leg. Like, Ridder was pretty damn awful. I agree. Like, because he's 23 years old, he could have an early career trajectory like DJ Moore, where the talent's there and it's not coming together because of various factors, QB play, etc. And it might be that Drake London is a year 4, year 5 guy that comes out, but he's going to stick around that value, I feel, even if he has a bad season or doesn't meet expectations. What's the furthest he can drop? The flip on that is next year's wide receiver classes, on as it stands, it's looking to be pretty exciting. So, yeah, I think if he has a bad season, he will drop, but not as violent as it could be. I'm not going to come on here and change my mind and disregard the jokes from last week's, even though that was a roast show and it's done in jest. Some of it that there's bits I believe in Drake London. The fact that the key for me is his usage in his role. Someone that was not a great separator, not great after the catch, and all right in contested catches. I think if he's an outside wide receiver, which he was only in the slot 18%, which I consider low compared to his peers. If he's used as an outside receiver, I've got worries for him. Like, I think he can be good. I think he can be a wide receiver 3 type. But if you get him in the slot, I think he's going to have a greater potential to do a lot more damage from.
Which is kind of that's kind of what we should expect, though, isn't it? With this, this coaching staff, which has come across from the Rams, where they've been around guys like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua who cycle in and out of the slot. Like, it would make too much sense to move him there. And there's definitely people who know ball better than I do who have suggested that getting him into that vertical slot type role similar to Justin Jefferson would make a lot of sense. So that's definitely part of my expectation. Now, if we get to week 1 and he is just out on the boundary, then I'll capitulate quite quickly on this one.
So I think there's some interesting points there. I do worry for him. I feel that he's someone that I can't see him ever having the ceiling at this point, and I am always shooting for this. So he's someone I've not gravitated towards. But like I said, if he is in the slot, I think we can get some real excitement out of Drake London. Do I think it'll happen? I'm not too sure myself. I think Kyle Pitts is someone that will be in the slot a lot. I think Mooney and Rondale Moore, they don't strike me as outside X receivers. So I think it's going to be tough. If you can get into that slot archetype, though, that is the best archetype to be in from some research and data I've done over at DLF. So if you're a Drake London fan, fingers crossed it's the slot. If not, you might have enjoyed the roast show. But we're going to move on to
I did enjoy the roast show.
Good stuff. And if you've not listened to the roast show, please check it out. It's it's close to the bone in certain aspects. But if you don't take yourself too seriously, it's something you should definitely check out from last week. But a guy that didn't make it to the row show, but someone that we sort of, I think some of us are all right with this guy. Some of us are a little bit off with this guy in the wildcard team. We've got your tight end target. Who have you got, Tom?
So it's Jake Ferguson, and I think Jake Ferguson just is kind of like the invisible man to some people when it comes to fantasy, because like they either want the elites or they want to just punt the position off altogether. And taking a guy who is tight end 11, to a lot of people, it's like, I don't want to pay that. I feel like I can just allocate resources elsewhere. But you're talking about a mid-second round pick probably to get somebody like Ferguson. And I think he's kind of just getting left behind, really, when you consider that he led all tight ends in red zone targets for 24, which 3 more than any other player. He was second on the Cowboys in target share at 17%. He's not got an incredibly high ceiling, but this offense, it was week 1 last year where we started to see them using him around the goal line and just peppering him. And that's something when we're talking about a position where even scoring 6 touchdowns across the course of a season can return you really good value. And I think when you're talking about a mid-second round pick, that's an easy buy for me, particularly with what we saw from the Cowboys down the stretch last year, from week 9 after the Cowboys came out of their bye. Dak Prescott was QB2 behind only Josh Allen. Like, he was 0.1 points per game behind Josh Allen. There's been no improvements in Dallas. Like, you look at the wide receiver room, and the word coming out of OTAs was that Jalen Tolbert might not be able to make the leap to wide receiver 3 like they hoped. Brandon Cooks is going to be 31 in September.
Yeah.
You look at the running game, and Jerry Jones' idea of all in is bringing back Zeke Elliott, just so that the last play he ever played for the Cowboys wasn't that one where he was the center and got annihilated. I just think Jake Ferguson isn't flashy, but if I'm in a position where I'm not sure if I'm truly a contender, but if I kind of looking at my squad and I think, you know what, there's some pieces here, I might be able to make a push, then Jake Ferguson's the kind of tight end that I'd be happy to buy.
Yeah, I think he's a really interesting guy. The fact that in my head, he's just Dalton Schultz again. Like, someone that talent-wise, it's not amazing, but look at his situation, look at the role. It's someone that's, really solid, and someone that's a placeholder. I think it gives you options, whether it be sort of pivot up to make that elite tight end sort of push, or looking to move off into someone that needs points, because I think he, just based on the situation and volume alone, he's going to be absolutely fine. He's someone that I think I don't ever see tight end 1, tight end 2 type weeks, but you build your roster around that. You take shots at other spots where Ferguson is someone that's safer, and you might even want to, if you're along those same wavelengths where you think, actually, he could have some good weeks, some bad weeks. Pair him with someone that's volatile, that has these crazy ceilings, but also pretty low floors, like a George Kittle, for example. If you're in a startup and you want to take those two as a pair, I think you're going to get a nice blend of the weeks where Kittle's tight end 1 and the weeks where Kittle's tight end 30 and Ferguson's steadily tight end 8 and 9. I think that's something I would push towards. So, you get a bit of love for a Cowboys player there.
I just think also, he's 25 years old, and the only thing that maybe makes me hesitant is the Dak Prescott situation. But you look around the Cowboys, and he's going to be cheap for another 2 years, which they're going to need because they've got loads of players to pay. And I think that at 25 years old, we do see these tight ends come along a little bit later than wide receivers or running backs. So there's enough for me to be okay with a mid-second. But I definitely wouldn't pay like the 203, kind of 202 range.
Good stuff. Well, that wraps up the players that you're targeting in Dynasty Best Ball, but we're now going to flip it up. We're going to go to the fades in Dynasty Best Ball, and this is a guy that our audience will be familiar with, right?
Yeah, and you guys got cancelled last week, but this is one which there's definitely some people who'd cancel me for. It's CJ Stroud, and like, don't get me wrong. I love CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud was one of the best stories to come out of the NFL last year. But QB3 is just utterly bananas to me. I mean, people get so enamored with these pocket passes, and it's like there's this mindset of, well, he can be my QB1 for the next 5-10 years or whatever. And it's so short-sighted. Like, I don't know. Most people I know haven't even been in a dynasty league for 5 years, let alone 10 years. So the idea of worrying about what you're doing for 10 years down the line, when you could be taking one of these elite dual threats with upside. I did a video not too long ago looking into what it takes for pocket passers to be able to compete with the dual threats. And you're basically having to average 240 passing yards per game and 1.8 touchdowns per game. And that's a really high bar. Like, we do see a couple of players hit that every year, but for the rushing quarterbacks, they basically have to average 5 rush attempts per game and around about 36 yards on the ground per game. And 2/3 of the players who hit that mark automatically end up in the top 12 on any given week. So it's just so much easier for the pocket passers. And we just, we haven't really seen it from CJ Stroud in terms of points production. Last year, he had only 2 top 5 weekly finishes. There were 11 other quarterbacks who had more than that. Russell Wilson, Sam Howell, Justin Herbert, they all had more top 12 weekly finishes than Stroud. So it's not like he was just scoring, QB8, QB9, and you got remarkable consistency from him. There were other guys spiking more often. He did have the single highest weekly score of any QB last year with 40 points. But then he was responsible for only one more of the top 100 QB weekly performances last year. He's got elite weapons. The Stephon Diggs edition is fantastic from a football perspective. And I do expect them to be, they're going to be fun for fantasy. But also he's got an offensive coordinator who maddeningly, just crazily runs the ball on first downs consistently. It's so predictable. Like, if you watch the Texans game and we're looking at Twitter whilst the game was playing last year, it wasn't even just the tape bros. It wasn't even like the people who really know ball who were screaming this. All of us were screaming it because you automatically then put yourself in situations which are difficult. Like, so maybe PFF Bobby comes back this year and like he's learned his lesson, like he's drilled into the analytics, but I don't know. Like, I'm just still a little skeptical. QB3 in best ball, when best ball drafts opened this year, he was going as the QB4 and he was going like right around top 40. And that's regressed now. He's down to about pick 70 and you see him falling occasionally to pick 80. That's absolutely, if there's that kind of correction in Dynasty as well, and we see him slipped out like QB5, QB6, wheels up. Like, absolutely, he'd be a great buy. But right now, I just can't get on board with it.
Yeah, I think CJ Stroud at QB3, it's a bad pick in Dynasty leagues, and it's a terrible pick in Dynasty Best Ball. I mean, I see that jersey behind you, number 8, Lamar Jackson. How is CJ Stroud going above Lamar Jackson, above Jalen Hurts?
I don't mean to sidetrack us, but at a certain point, we're going to have to start respecting these guys like Jalen Hurts, who led the Eagles to a Super Bowl, Lamar Jackson, who was 1 vote away from my former employer from having 2 unanimous MVP votes. There's only been 2 unanimous MVP votes, and Lamar's had almost 2 himself. Like, there is so little respect for the dual threats because traditional quarterbacking involves throwing the ball more, but it's absolute ignorance to the way that fantasy points are scored these days.
Yeah, and we've seen it with guys like your Justin Herberts, your Joe Burrows.
Yep. Baker Mayfield
get put to QB3, and then we know where CJ Stroud's going to be in 12 months' time. He's going to be around QB 6 or 7. We already know that. Like, he's going to have a stupid season, Mahomes-esque, to stay there. And I'm not willing to bet on outliers like that.
And even Mahomes, when you look across his career, he doesn't average over 5 rush attempts, but he averages 3.6 rush attempts per game. We didn't see that from CJ Stroud. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but he was not rushing anywhere close to that.
Yeah, he gets a double thumbs up for me on this one. It's the one that I think everybody at Fantasy Wildcard will be on board with this one. So great pick. And we're keeping the great picks rolling. We're going to come to your running back section. Are you looking to fade now, Tom?
So this is Josh Jacobs, and a couple of months ago when I first put my best ball rankings together for this season, I initially was a bit higher on Josh Jacobs, and I expected to be high on him throughout the offseason. But much like most of Josh Jacobs' career, it hasn't really gone the distance. Like, you look at every single word coming out of Green Bay, and it's like, yep, Matt LaFleur still plans to use a 2 running back committee approach. And this is a guy who drove us mad over the years using AJ Dillon when Aaron Jones was hot. AJ Dillon, who's been woefully inefficient, still signed with the team. I don't think AJ Dillon makes the roster though, because he's only got 50,000 guaranteed. But Marshawn Lloyd seems to be picking up a bit of steam. People seem to like what he's doing at OTAs. And Matt LaFleur, you have to dig back a few years, but he used to keep Derrick Henry off the field and put Dion Lewis on there, like the weirdest running back duo to ever kind of play. But Josh Jacobs, when I was higher on him in the offseason, it was a pure volume exercise going, okay, well, this can be a play where if he's going to get several hundred touches, it's wheels up. But I just don't think he's going to get that volume. I think if you can get Josh Jacobs cheap, if you can go out and buy him, I don't know, like an early second or maybe even a late first rather than the kind of market value, then excellent, do it. But in Dynasty Best Ball, it'd probably be a lot easier to take than in managed leagues. I just think that Josh Jacobs has kind of shown us what he is. He had one really good year, and then last year kind of regressed on a bunch. He's not a natural dominator in the receiving game to give us that kind of elite ceiling. And the one thing the Packers showed us is that they're quite happy to drive the ball downfield. So maybe it just doesn't happen for him.
Yeah, got to be one of the worst running back first round real life draft picks I can remember. Like, he did not deserve to go there at all. And someone that he's been a volume guy his whole career. He's been volume and touchdowns. I think he's similar to David Montgomery in that respect, where I think if he's getting all the volume in an elite offense and getting tons of touchdowns, brilliant. Like, David Montgomery had a ton of touchdowns last year. He barely scraped running back 15 in fantasy points per game. So I've got big concerns with Jacobs in all formats. I think he's someone that, like, you look at his metrics, the metrics behind the numbers, and it's not pleasant viewing. He's just a volume guy. And yeah, that offense is going to be great. But I'm a Marshawn Lloyd guy. And at running back 16, I just think there's, in this format as well, you're probably better to tear down and take a couple of shots, like a Kendre Miller, like other guys that are going a lot later than Jacobs.
And I think you can sell Jacobs quite easily because compared to a lot of the other running backs who moved this year, he is a bit younger. He's only 26, turned 26 this offseason. His contract on the face value looks like a good deal, but because Green Bay don't like putting guaranteed money into future years, they can get out of that. Like, I think it's a 3-4 year deal, but I'd be surprised if there wasn't, potential for him to get out of it as early as next offseason.
It's like a year deal every year. So it's basically when Marshawn Lloyd's ready, in my eyes, then they'll just get another guy to pair with Marshawn Lloyd.
Exactly, yeah.
Indeed. So great pick there. We're going to move on to wide receiver now, Tom. And this is a guy that might raise a few eyebrows based on the name value.
So it's Brandon Ayuk, and I've got to caveat this by saying I love Brandon Ayuk, and a couple of years ago, I drafted the hell out of Brandon Ayuk. I think that the problem I have is always Brandon Ayuk's price is tied to his potential very heavily in a way that I'm just not sure he can return value even if he stays in San Francisco this year. Like, last year, he ran so pure. He had the 6th most yards among wide receivers on the 29th most targets. Like, that is an insane level of efficiency. And he's never going to hit the point where he's getting 150 targets because the way that offense works with Christian McCaffrey, with Deebo Samuel and George Kittle, it's always going to be spread around, and there's going to be games which favor Deebo Samuel, particularly like when they match up against certain defenses. You know it's coming. You go, okay, this is a week where Deebo Samuel's absolutely going to crush because they play zone coverage. When it comes to man coverage defenses, that's when Brandon Ayuk tends to pop off. Deebo Samuel, you can go out and get Deebo Samuel for like the 112, 201 in Superflex leagues. But if you're talking about Brandon Ayuk, you're looking at somewhere around like the 106 to 105. Despite the fact that last year, Ayuk, he had 4 top 20 weekly finishes, was held below 80 receiving yards on 8 occasions, finished as wide receiver 30 or worse on 6 occasions. Meanwhile, Deebo had 8 top 20 finishes, matched Ayuk with 8 games below 80 yards, but only failed to score touchdowns in 43% of his games. Like, he was just much more productive in the end zone, which I know touchdowns aren't something we want to say are sticky. But Samuel is scripted into games in a way that Ayuk just isn't. And maybe things change if George Kittle retires in another year. Maybe things change if Deebo moves on. But I'm not looking to pay this right now without knowing whether Ayuk gets a contract or not.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the situation is it's a gift and a curse. Like, I think it gets a lot of attention because of the 49ers offense and how it's lauded for fantasy as such. But yeah, like, you'd expect him to be more volatile with that offense. The fact that he seems to be more steady, and it's usually Deebo that goes crazy or Kittle that goes crazy, and Ayuk's just pretty good numbers. And at wide receiver 15, I just think that you are needing a little bit more oomph in there, because you can find someone that puts up Ayuk's numbers in the 20s, the 30s. They might be a little bit older, of course, but thinking about your roster size, it doesn't matter if you've got a 30-year-old wide receiver 7 that can put up these sort of numbers every couple of weeks. So I'm with you on that. I think, being honest, wide receivers in that range in general in Dynasty, I think it's a bit of a trap for me. I think I tend to go a little bit higher or just further down in that tier. So I think on the basis of name, people might be shocked, but yeah, Deebo for this format, no doubt.
Big time.
And we're going to wrap up the play selections for the fades with your tight end, Tom.
So this is Ben Sinnott. And I mean, you say he's a tight end, but this guy, he's a fullback. He's a halfback. Like, I think that the reason Washington brought him in is because they want him to block. This is projected to be the worst offensive line in the league. They spent 1 draft pick on an offensive lineman in like the 3rd, 4th round, when I expected them to put 2 or 3 draft picks into the offensive line. So already, I think it's like tricky to imagine him really hitting a ceiling outcome. And I think that people have kind of been red-pilled by the rookie tight end season that we just saw with like Sam Laporta, Luke Musgrave, Dalton Kincaid, Tucker Kraft. They all had really strong moments. But when you look back before the 2023 season, back to the year 2000, there have been 384 tight ends that have played in the NFL in that period and recorded some form of stat for fantasy value. Of the 384, there were 43% of them failed to record an average of like 2 PPR points per game.
Wow.
Like, only 12% scored over 6.5 PPR points per game. So that's about the equivalent of tight end 20. So if you're telling me I have to pay tight end 15 prices to get a guy who I think is a better pass blocker and a better run blocker than a pass catcher, who's competing with Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Luke McCaffrey, who there's some good whispers about, in what could be potentially a run-heavy offense, and also, not to mention, Zach Ertz, who cock-blocked Trey McBride for a couple of years. Like, I have no faith in Ben Sinnott being fantasy valuable, even in a best ball format this year.
I mean, I didn't think Zach Ertz was going to get mentioned on the show tonight, so that's one for the bingo card. Yeah, he's an interesting one, isn't it? I think I'm more inclined to take him in rookie drafts because just the the way that it pans out, he can tax his squad and etc. I just think rookie tight ends, I'm still not 100% there. I've always sort of tended to fade rookie tight ends, especially in startups, just because I'm an old guy. I like production. I like older guys. Fair dues. So it's an interesting spot. I struggle to think like in Dynasty Best Ball, what sort of build am I gonna take Sinner? And it tends to be I have to look at my startups, but it's ones where I'm not playing for year one. I'm definitely playing for year 2, 3, and it's these massive rosters. So yeah,
because I mean,
go on.
I was just gonna say, you can tell yourself a story if you've got enough roster space for, okay, a year from now, is Zach Ertz gone? Is Jahan Dotson out of town? We know if he's washed or whatever. And perhaps Luke McCaffrey turns into nothing. And then you're like, okay, well, maybe he's the second target there. But I don't see it. I think when I look at him, you're talking about somebody who's going to turn into the likes of Hayden Hurst, the likes of just these tight ends where it's like, okay, you're going to be out there, you're going to play an awful lot of snaps. So if your league gives you points per snaps, absolutely. But in traditional ones, I'll just stick to guys who get points.
Yeah, I think we've seen it. I can see an outcome where he has a good season by his standards and stays around, if not climbs a little bit. Like I think of a Luke Musgrave, someone that didn't do a ton as a rookie, and he sort of stuck around where he was expected to be, and he's facing competition from Tucker Kraft. I mean, we still probably don't know who's the A and the B in that. I think people will say Musgrave cost the draft capital, but Tucker Kraft flashed a little bit as well. So with Sinner, I think I'm probably not as low on him as you. I'll put my teeth in. But I do respect that there is probably a wider range of outcomes where, yeah, it's a work in progress with that offense. And yes, it could be the number 2 tag in a year's time. I can also see a story where actually there is reinforcements at wide receiver, because I'm probably not as bullish on that core as yourself. Okay, right. So we're coming to the best part of the show, the fantasy wildcard selection, where we're going to get Tom to pick his fantasy wildcard, the player he thinks will improve their dynasty value the most in 2024. So, Tom, who have you got as your fantasy wildcard selection?
I definitely spent a good bit of time considering this one. If one of your guests hadn't already picked Jaylen Warren, that would have been a smash for me. But I toyed with Rashad Bateman. I thought, there's been enough, but people don't want to hear me talk about Baltimore Ravens players. So let's pivot and talk about Jonathan Brooks, who I think, surprisingly for a rookie running back, is being held in check. Perhaps it's down to the fact that he tore his ACL in November, but the ACL injury that Brooks had was a clean tear, very much akin to Breece Hall's ACL tear, which we just saw him come back from and be nothing short of fantastic. Like if the Jets had a even remotely competent quarterback in the room, then Breece Hall would have smashed to an even nuclear level. But I'm not saying Jonathan Brooks is going to come out of the gate and do that, but we don't need to worry about him in the same way that we've had to look at guys like Javonte Williams and J.K. Dobbins, who've had multiple ligament injuries with the ACL. It's once you throw in the MCL, the PCL, all those like additional bits, that's what throws up additional scarring, additional recovery time, additional surgeries. So yeah, I'm pretty high on Brooks. I think that if he'd been healthy, we heard the whispers from Adam Schefter even before the draft that teams viewed him as a first-round talent if he'd been healthy. Wow. The Panthers aren't the most sensible organization or the best drafters of players, but the fact that they were willing to draft him with the draft capital they got, and then you look at this running back. You got Chuba Hubbard, who's incredibly up and down. And then you've got Miles Sanders, who, if it wasn't for the ridiculous contract that they gave him a year ago, would have been cut already. Like, it just makes no sense for him to cut him. He was having a really nice year. before the ACL injury at Texas. And if you just look at his raw stats across his career, you go, well, these aren't terribly impressive. Before then, you realize that he's been sat behind Bijan Robinson, Roshan Johnson. But last year, 1,135 yards underground in 11 games, 286 through the air. The Panthers, they invested really heavily in their offensive line. I don't think anybody's expecting them to be a top 10, top 15 unit necessarily, but it's realistic to think that they could become a top 20 kind of unit under Dave Canales, who we all expect good things from. And that would be a massive leap for basically just a turnstile offensive line last year. So, yeah, you're going to have to pay a little bit for him. But I think if you're rebuilding, or if you're in a situation where you've made a bit of a mess of a dynasty team and you need to take some risks to acquire some additional value, then I like taking Jonathan Brooks now, because in 6 months, I think the price is going to be substantially more.
Yeah, I do really love this pick, if I'm honest. I think this embodies what a fantasy wildcard selection is about, someone that can rise rapidly in a short space of time. I think where I do have a little bit of pause is just more about Brooks in general. I didn't see him as a first-round talent. I think if I'm going back a couple of years, him being a running back 10 in Dynasty for what he's put on sort of taping in college, that scares me a little bit. However, in this current climate, who is the competition around his spots? He's kind of pushed up there just on merit, really, and what it could be. What I do know is he's going to be featured heavily for the Panthers, who are an improving team. And I think if Bryce Young takes any sort of step in that offense, I think we're going to see some nice value bumps for the likes of Brooks, the likes of Deontay. I can easily see a story where he comes on strong late this season. You look at some of the guys ahead of him in Dynasty rankings, and honestly, depending how things go, even if he just has a good finish to the season, I can see him landing as potentially borderline top 5, pretty comfortably. And if he has an amazing season, if he is truly this first round talent, then people are going to put him above. Maybe if there's some sort of drop off from McCaffrey or Taylor, they're going to put him above these guys just based on the age.
Well, I think you can look at the Keep Trade Cut rankings right now, and Saquon Barkley's 2 spots ahead of him. So we'll be going into Saquon Barkley's 28-year-old offseason. I think you can move him ahead of him already. I don't see any world where that doesn't happen unless he falls flat on his face and is insanely bad. Kyron Williams, if Blake Corum comes in and does create a role for himself, then you could see him pass him. Travis Etienne, if he becomes another half-season wonder like he's been for the last 2 years, you could step ahead of him. Travis Etienne might be on a new team, free agent. Devon Achane, if he can't hold up, can he jump up there? Jonathan Taylor, if he's not getting any of a passing game, can he jump up there? I'm not saying he becomes a top 3 or a top 4 running back necessarily, but if 3 of those sort of 6 players slide out, then it's quite easy to see him jumping up to sort of like RB6, RB7, and again, giving you a chance to return on investment.
Indeed. We'll see how this one goes. I think it's an interesting one because it's for the year 2024. We'll just see how he's peaking towards December. But I think it's a great shout and a great idea that someone that, if they didn't have the injury concerns, the market would have him higher, no doubt. Okie dokie. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's show, where we've discussed Dynasty Best Ball with the wonderful, amazing Tom Strachan. Before you go, Tom, please let the audience know where they can find you, what you're up to, and anything you'd like to plug.
Just launched a new show on Fantasy Pros podcast feed and YouTube channel with Andrew Erickson. Each week we're talking rises and fallers in redraft ADP as the season gets closer, doing a lot of best ball drafts for him. You can find myself and Rich over on the Fantasy Sanctuary YouTube channel. Got a lot of redraft content coming down the pipe over the next few weeks. At least 2 best ball shows every week. It's just my favorite time of year. all the written works on Fantasy Pros. And no, I just want to say thank you for having me, Kev. It's always a pleasure to come on and chat with you guys. I've got a lot of respect for the platform that you guys have grown and the consistency that you guys have with churning out good content.
Really appreciate it, Tom, and I just want to thank you for coming on tonight's show. And Best Ball Sicko is in your bio on X, and I think you've done a great job of outlining Dynasty Best Ball and sort of some of the theory behind it, but also some of the players you can be looking for as well. And it's nice to catch up with you as always, and you bring in plenty to the audience. Can't wait to see you again next week at the UK FFC.
Oh, it's going to be good.
Indeed it is. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to follow and subscribe to us on X and YouTube at Fantasy Wildcard and at Wildcard Dynasty. Join us for our show every week of the off season. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again very soon.
When you have the wild card, you have the power to change the game.